This smothered checkmating pattern is known as Philidor's legacy. The Frenchman Philidor was a giant in today's chess theory, but this checkmating pattern was described by the Italian Lucina in 1497, 300 years before Philidor. Some chess players credit this smothered mate as being the first artistic thing they learned about the game and inspiring a love of the creative side of chess. Many miniatures have been played several times over. I know this one as Bird Amateur London 1886, but it's been played by many other people. When black plays 3g5 in this king's gambit position, it should be for the reason that the f4 pawn inhibits white's development. The mobilization of the c1 bishop and both white rooks is slowed by this black pawn on f4. So black should be playing g5 to hold the f4 pawn up. Black should not be playing 3g5 for the tactical reason of playing g4 in order to drive off the f3 knight. Because queen h4 can be a deadly check when white is not ahead in development. But in the cases where black has invested two pawn moves, g5 plus g4, in order to build this check, while white is developing pieces, knight f3, knight f5, plus knight c3, this queen h4 sally has often led to white brilliancies. Black's discovered check will win a rook, but white's pieces have kept coming out. And even after black's new queen appears on h1, it's on h1 in the corner, while every other black piece is asleep. Queen h5 threatens mate in 2 by queen f7 plus queen f8, and knight h6 is probably an insufficient defense after white plays d4 to fill up the center, discover a threat to the h6 knight, get ready to castle on the queen side, fully mobilizing white's pieces. Bishop e7 enables white to win in pretty fashion. Knight f6 carries a threat to smother, which a number of players over the years haven't recognized. One outstanding reason to learn checkmating patterns is so you don't get checkmated. Knight d6 is a classic double check. The only way to deal with a double check is to move the king. Queen e8 smothers the black king, and whether black captures with rook e8 or knight e8, knight f7 is mate. I wrote a book, a first book of Morphy, which illustrated vital positional themes with games played by the first American chess champion, Paul Morphy. This game isn't in the book, but if I had to do it all over again, I probably would have stuck this game, Morphy Amateur, Paris 1859, in the chapter about castling as soon as possible. Instead of waiting for move 3 to make this developing move with a threat, black probably should have made that at move 2. Because after bishop c4, knight f6, white can play knight g5 with a bigger threat, and d4 is also good, filling up the center with white pawns. After ed, 5e5 is also possible here. When black grabs a second pawn, it gets a little wild. White gets to take advantage of two different pins. The pin on the knight coerces d5, and when black plays queen d5 by force, knight c6 takes advantage of the pin on the d4 pawn. Black mustn't play dc because his queen hangs, and he can't play knight c3 because the knight is pinned. If the queen has to move, the knight gains time with the recapture and threatens mate in 2. Let's say black passed his move. The double check will force king d8. And rook e8 is mate. Another cool double check pattern. So bishop e6 is the best move. Knight eg5 hits the pinned piece. Black really ought to castle now. Black really ought to castle. Bishop b4 goes bad in a hurry. Rook e6 crashes through. And after 12, knight e6, black can't castle. You're not allowed to castle through a check. Black may not castle here on the queen side because his king would be passing through d8, which the knight covers. He can't castle through f8 to castle kingside because the knight hits that square as well. So now the king is stuck in the center, and white threatens a couple forks. Knight g7 forks king and queen. Knight c7 forks king and rook. Queen g7 seems to take care of both those threats, but it enables white to keep bringing up more force. Queen e2 is another developing move that makes a threat. The threats to fork on c7 and g7 are renewed because after the e6 knight moves, the black queen on e7 will find herself pinned. Bishop d6 takes care of one threat. Knight f7 is a lovely move, making way for the last white pieces to come into the game with threats. Black probably ought to play knight e7 here. That will coordinate his knight and queen against f5. See, if there were a knight on e7 now, when white makes this discovery, he can put a piece on f5 to make a useful interposition. But this is the classic Philidor theme once again on a different side of the chessboard. Black can't play king d8 because queen d7's mate. And after king b8, we close him up with the double check and snuff him out. Coming next, the Philidor's Legacy theme recurs in one of Capablanca's best miniatures.